Countdown started at 7,200 seconds, and K.L. Mercer's first thought was that the number looked wrong in base 10. He was standing inside the machine when it happened. One moment the salvage bay of the derelict Vethari cruiser was dark, quiet, smelling of ozone and old death, the way all dead ships smelled. Like something electrical had crawled into something organic, and both had lost. The next, the walls of the chamber he'd climbed into bloomed with bioluminescent script, alien numerals cascading down curved panels of bone-white alloy, pooling at his feet like spilled mercury. The light crawled up his boots, his legs, his chest. It wrapped around his throat and pressed against his temples, with the intimacy of hands that knew exactly where to squeeze. 3 seconds K.L. couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't do anything except stand there, while something ancient and precise took his measurements. Then the light withdrew. The numerals settled into a single figure, projected at eye level in cold blue phosphorescence. 7,200. And beneath it, a symbol he didn't need a translation algorithm to understand. A circle collapsing inward on itself. Closing, ending. A period at the end of a sentence he hadn't known he was writing. Kale, Sable's voice crackled through the comm, layered with the static that infested every frequency this deep in the Korath expanse. Your vitals just spiked. What are you touching in there? He stared at the number. It ticked to 7,199. Nothing, he said. I'm not touching anything. Then get out. Ryan's got the cargo manifests loaded and we need to move before the patrol sweep hits this sector. I'm not explaining to an Vethari border drone why a human salvage crew is picking through their trash. 7,197. He stepped out of the chamber on legs that felt borrowed from someone who hadn't just been measured for a coffin. The salvage bay stretched around him. Gutted corridors, ruptured conduits, trailing crystalline filaments like severed veins, picked clean bones of a vessel that had been drifting in the Korath expanse for decades. A Vethari light cruiser, class unknown, crew long dead or long gone. Sable had called it a jackpot when they'd found it on their long-range scans. 3 weeks of fuel in the reserves, intact navigation crystals, maybe even a weapons array they could strip and sell at Threshold Station. Enough to keep their ship, the Laika, limping along for another 6 months. Kale hadn't cared about any of it. He'd wandered off while Sable and Ryan worked the manifests and ran diagnostic pulls on the nav crystals, the way he always wandered off now, the way he'd been wandering off since his father died 11 months ago. Walking away from conversations, from responsibilities, anything that required him to be present in a universe that had taken the only person who made presence feel worthwhile. Leaving his crew to do the work, while he smoked stale synth tobacco in dark corners and pretended the cosmos owed him something for his grief. He'd found the chamber by accident. A sealed room at the vessel's core, untouched by whatever had killed the original crew. The door had been locked with a bioelectric seal, Vethari tech, keyed to living tissue, calibrated broadly enough that any organic neural pattern could trigger it. His hand on the panel had been enough. It opened for him like a mouth that had been waiting. A single upright pod, shaped like a coffin, stood on end, its interior lined with sensor filaments thin as spider silk. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands, each one trembling slightly in the dead air as if tasting the atmosphere. He'd stepped in because he was bored, because he was reckless, because some part of him, the part that'd been driving the Laika into progressively worse jobs in progressively more dangerous sectors, had stopped caring about consequences the day they'd pulled his father's body from the wreckage of the Callaway Run. Now the number followed him. Feel it behind his eyes. 7,183, 7,182, 7,181, ticking with the mechanical patience of something that had been counting down long before humans learned to count at all. 2 hours, that's what it meant in standard time. 2 hours, and then the circle would close. He found Sable in the forward hold, elbow deep in a navigation console she'd pried open with a multi-tool, and what he suspected was sheer stubbornness. She was tall, sharp-jawed, her dark hair cropped close to her skull in the military fashion she'd never quite shaken from her years in Terran Frontier Corps. Sable Okonkwo had been his father's co-pilot before she'd been Kale's. Recruited by Eli Mercer on a station platform 12 years ago because she'd been the only applicant who'd told him his ship was ugly, and his posted salary was an insult. Eli had doubled the salary on the spot and never regretted it. Sometimes Cale caught her looking at him with an expression that sat halfway between loyalty and mourning. Not grief for Eli, though that was there too, but grief for what Cale was supposed to have become. As if she was still waiting for the version of him that Eli had believed in, the one who would grow into the captain's chair instead of using it as a place to sulk. "We've got a problem," Cale said. She didn't look up. "We've always got a problem. Last week it was the coolant leak. Week before that it was the port thruster alignment. Before that it was you selling our emergency beacon for synth tobacco money. So what is it this time?" "Say, Sable." Something in his voice made her stop. She pulled her hands from the console, wiped them on her flight suit, and turned. Eyes moved across his face the way a hull scanner reads structural integrity. Methodical, thorough, missing nothing, categorizing every crack. "Happened." He told her. He told her about the chamber, the pod, the light that had crawled over him like something alive and curious and clinical all at once. He told her about the number. She listened without interrupting, her arms crossed, her weight shifting slightly to her back foot the way it did when she was processing something she didn't want to be true. When he finished, she was quiet for a long time. "Show me," she said. They went back. The chamber was still lit, the countdown still running. 6,947, 1646, projected on every surface like a heartbeat made visible. Sable walked around the pod 3 times, fingers hovering over the filaments without touching them. Close enough that the fine hairs on her knuckles stirred in the static field. She pulled up her wrist scanner and ran a full diagnostic sweep, then ran it again with different parameters, then stood very still while she read the results. "It's a Vethry terminus," she said finally. Her voice was flat, controlled, professional. The voice she used when things were worse than she wanted to admit. And she was buying time by being precise. "I've read about these in declassified Frontier Corps intelligence briefs. It's never seen one operational. What does it do?" "Exactly what you think it does." She looked at him, and the professionalism cracked just enough for him to see the fear beneath it. "It reads biological systems at the molecular level. Cellular decay rates, neurological degradation patterns, immune function efficiency, telomere integrity, organ performance curves, metabolic trajectory, every measurable variable that contributes to biological viability. And it calculates a death point, not a guess, not a probability distribution, a fixed point on the timeline. That's impossible. Human technology, yes. The Vethry have been refining biological prediction models for 12,000 years. Their mathematical frameworks for organic systems are so far beyond ours that our best xenobiologists describe them the way medieval alchemists would describe quantum mechanics. They can see that it works, they just can't explain why. She stopped herself, looked at the countdown. Their accuracy rate across all cataloged species is 99.7%. And the other 0.3, measurement error, hardware malfunction, not biological exceptions. No species has ever beaten the prediction through biology alone. She paused, and the pause was heavy. "The Vethry don't use weapons of mass destruction, Cale. They don't glass planets or deploy bioweapons or bombard from orbit. They use the terminus. They show a civilization's leaders their death clocks, and they wait." 3 spacefaring civilizations surrendered to the Vethry Dominion after a single demonstration. Every subject shown their countdown stopped functioning within minutes, stopped eating, stopped planning, stopped fighting, stopped everything. The knowledge of certain death, made precise and inescapable, is the most efficient weapon ever built. The number ticked, 6,891. Cale thought about his father, Eli Mercer, who had spent 30 years running salvage through the worst corridors of the Expanse, who had laughed at pirates and cursed at nebula storms and, once, repaired a hull breach with nothing but cargo tape and a vocabulary that would have made a dockworker blush. Eli Mercer, who had died not in some grand catastrophe but from a slow bleed in a crumpled cockpit while his son sat 3 bulkheads away, frozen, unable to move, unable to face what he already knew he'd find. 7,000 seconds, less now, less every moment. "Okay," Cale said. Sable stared at him. "Okay, get Reen. Meet me on the Laika in 10 minutes. Cale, we need to talk about this. We need to contact the Frontier Corps, or a xenomedical team, or in 10 minutes. He turned and walked out of the chamber, and the countdown followed him like a shadow stitched to the base of his spine. Ryan was 16 and furious about everything. She had been furious since she was 12, which was the year her parents had been killed in a docking accident on Threshold Station. A cargo loader. Malfunction. A pressurization failure. 2 bodies recovered from a bay that should have been safe. She'd cycled thought through 3 foster placements in 6 months before Eli Mercer had stepped in, signed the guardianship papers, and given her a bunk on the Laika. Eli hadn't tried to fix her anger. He'd given it somewhere to go. He'd taught her to draw, first on tablets, then on bulkheads, then on the hull itself, mixing industrial paints in coffee cans and teaching her the way light moved through a nebula, the way a star cluster could look like a handful of scattered coins if you got the scale right. By the time she was 14, Ryan could paint a section of hull that would make station security stop their patrols to stare. After Eli died, responsibility for Ryan had fallen to KL by default, and he'd handled it the way he handled everything in the 11 months since the Callaway run, badly, resentfully, with a casual cruelty that he recognized as displaced grief but couldn't seem to stop dispensing. He'd hidden her sketch pads, told her that art was a waste of ship resources, that every gram of paint she used was a gram of fuel they couldn't buy. 2 weeks ago, he'd erased the digital mural she'd been working on for 3 months. A sprawling, luminous star chart inspired by the ones Eli used to paint on the Laika's hull, rendered in colors so precise they looked like windows into actual space. She hadn't cried. She hadn't screamed. She just looked at him with those dark, steady eyes that were so much like Eli's. It made his teeth ache, and the silence had been worse than any weapon the universe had aimed at him, before or since. She was sitting in the cargo bay when he found her, cross-legged on a crate of salvage circuit boards, her tablet balanced on her knee, drawing again because Ryan always drew, because she'd learned from Eli that making things was the only honest response to a universe that kept taking them away. Her current piece was small, a sketch of the creature she'd glimpsed through a viewport on their approach to the derelict, some kind of deep space organism that had been drifting in the cruiser's wake. She'd captured it in quick, confident lines, a shape like a thought someone hadn't finished thinking. "We need to talk," Cale said. "No, we don't." She didn't look up. Her stylus moved in short, precise strokes. "Ryan, you don't talk to me, Cale. You give orders and you make fun of my work, and sometimes you pretend I don't exist, which is actually the nicest thing you do. Because at least then you're not actively making my life worse. That's not talking. That's a hostage situation with shared meals." He stood there in the cargo bay's bad lighting, feeling the countdown in his chest like a second heartbeat that didn't belong to him. 6,614. 6,613. "You're right," he said. "About all of it. I need you to come to the ship anyway." Something in his tone made her look up. She studied him for a long moment, the same thorough, unflinching scan that Sable had given him, only rawer, less guarded, unprotected by years of professional composure. Ryan hadn't learned to hide her intelligence behind diplomacy yet. She saw everything and said so. "What's wrong with you?" she asked, not with concern, with the wary precision of someone who'd been hurt enough to need to see the next blow coming. "Everything," he said. "Come on. On the Laika," he told them both. He stood in the narrow galley with its bolted-down table and its coffee maker that only worked if you hit it at a 30-degree angle on the left side, and he laid it out. The terminus. The countdown. 2 hours, starting from a number that was already smaller than it had been when he'd first said it. Ryan went pale. Not the pale of fear. The pale of someone absorbing information too large for the space it was forced into. Her hands went flat on the table. Sable went still. Not calm, controlled. The stillness of a woman who had survived 4 years in the Frontier Corps by learning to process catastrophe without flinching, and who was now applying that skill to the hardest scenario she'd ever faced, losing the last connection to the man she'd followed across the galaxy. "So what do we do?" Ryan asked. Her voice cracked on the last word despite everything she did to stop it. "We make a list," Cale said. Sable's frown cut deep lines around her mouth. "A list. Things I need to do. Things I should have done months ago, years ago. Things I owe people who deserved better than what I gave them." He pulled a battered datapad from his jacket pocket, the same one his father had, carried for 20 years, its casing scratched and dented from 100 salvage runs. Its screen cracked in one corner, where Eli had dropped it during the Callaway run, and never gotten around to fixing it. Cale had carried it since the funeral, not using it, just carrying it. A talisman of guilt disguised as a keepsake. He set it on the table. I've got less than 2 hours. I'm not spending them sitting in a dark corner waiting for the clock to stop. That's what I've been doing for 11 months, and I'm done. Cale. We should be trying to find a way to reverse the terminus reading. If we contact a xenomedical, there's no reversing it. You said it yourself. 12,000 years of refinement, 417 species, 99.7% accuracy. 3 civilizations that surrendered rather than face what it told them. He looked at Sable. The first time in almost a year, his eyes were clear, not happy, not at peace, but present. I'm not surrendering, and I'm not pretending there's a cure. I'm making a list. The silence stretched like a wire between them. Then Ryan reached across the table and picked up Eli's datapad. She handled it carefully, the way you handle something that belongs to the dead, with respect for the hands that held it before yours. Okay, she said quietly. Goes on it. He'd thought about it during the walk back from the chamber. Not the things he wanted. He'd spent 11 months doing whatever he wanted, taking whatever caught his eye, indulging every impulse toward self-destruction and calling it freedom. All it had gotten him was a ship that was falling apart, crew that flinched when he entered a room, and a reputation across 3 sea stations as a man who'd squandered everything his father had built. The list wasn't about want, it was about debt. First, I owe Ryan an apology, he said, not looking at her. A real one. Not a word, an action. Something that costs me something. Ryan's hand tightened on the datapad, her knuckles going pale. Second, I owe Sable the truth about what happened on the Callaway run, about Desh. The name landed in the galley like a stone, dropped into still water. Desh Okonkwo, Sable's younger brother. A co-pilot who'd been in the cockpit with Eli when the Callaway run went wrong. The crash that had killed them both, and left Cale as the only survivor, and the only witness to what had happened in those final minutes. The crash that Cale had never fully explained, because the truth was a blade that cut in every direction. Sable's face didn't change, but something behind it shifted. A wall going up, coming down. Cale couldn't tell which. Third, I owe my father a finished piece. He was mapping the Valith corridor before he died, painting it on Threshold Station's hull, one of his charts. It was 3/4 done when he couldn't finish it. I want to finish it. And? Asked. And fourth, I want to find out what's in the box. They both looked at him. There was something else in that chamber on the Vethari ship, Cale said. A container, small, sealed, made of the same material as the terminus pod. Something alive inside it. I could feel it vibrating through the casing, like a heartbeat. I left it because I wasn't thinking straight. Shouldn't have. Ryan wrote it all down on Eli's datapad. 4 items. 2 hours. The handwriting was her own, neat, angular, precise. But the screen was Eli's, and somehow that made the list feel like a collaboration between the living and the dead. This is insane, Sable said, but she was already reaching for her jacket. Yeah, Cale agreed. Let's go. They went back for the box first. Sable piloted the shuttle across the gap between the Leica and the derelict while Cale sat in the co-pilot's seat and watched the countdown in his tick like a metronome set to a tempo he couldn't change. 5,891. 90. He could feel it now, not just as a number but as a physical presence. A tightening in the cavity behind his sternum, a thinning of the air in his lungs, as if reality itself was constricting around him 1 second at a time. The creature's box was where he'd left it, sitting on a shelf in the terminus chamber like something placed there and forgotten. It was small, barely larger than a clenched fist, made of the same bone-white alloy as the pod, its surface covered in micro-engravings too fine to read without magnification. When Ryan picked it up, the thing inside shifted, and a sound came through the walls of the container. Not quite a sound, a hum. Low, warm, organic, like a heartbeat heard through deep water. Careful, Sable said from the doorway. One hand resting on the sidearm she wore out of habit more than expectation. Ryan held the container close to her ear, tilting her head the way she did when she was listening to music only she could hear. And something extraordinary happened. Container's surface bloomed with light. The same bioluminescent blue as the terminus projections, but softer, warmer, more alive. Pulsed in rhythm with Ryan's breathing, speeding and slowing as she inhaled and exhaled, matching her like a mirror made of light. Responding to her, Kale said. To her bioelectrics, Sable corrected, but her clinical tone was strained. Human bioelectrics. The Vethari are silicon-based. Their neural architecture is crystalline, not electrochemical. Their nervous systems produce structured data pulses, not the chaotic electromagnetic wash that organic brains generate. Whatever's in that container is calibrated to organic neural patterns. It's never felt anything like a human mind before. Ryan opened the container. The creature inside was no larger than a moth. It had translucent wings veined with threads of light that shifted color as they moved. Blue to gold to violet to colors. Kale didn't have names for. Colors that seemed to exist just outside the edge of what his eyes could process. Its body was compact, seed-shaped, covered in fine fillets that rippled like grass in wind. And its eyes, if they were eyes, were 2 points of warm amber light that tracked movement with an intelligence that didn't feel mechanical. It sat on Ryan's palm and vibrated, and the hum deepened, became layered, became almost musical, a chord built from frequencies that resonated in the chest rather than the ears. It's beautiful, Ryan whispered. It's a Vethari biosynth, Sable said, but her voice had lost its clinical edge, the way a scientist's voice loses its distance when the data becomes a living thing sitting in a girl's hand. A biological construct. They grow them as living interface components for their technology. Organic processors that bridge the gap between crystalline Vethari systems and biological inputs. This one must have been part of the Terminus system, its sensor array. The creature lifted from Ryan's palm, hovered for a moment on wings that barely seemed to move, and then drifted across the chamber to Kale. It landed on his shoulder with a weight so slight he felt it more as warmth than pressure. And when it settled against the skin of his neck, countdown in his mind flickered. Just for an instant, 5022 became 5623, then snapped back to 500621 and resumed its descent. Did you feel that? Kale said. Feel what? The count. It stuttered, went backward for a second. Sable's eyes narrowed. She opened her mouth to respond, but the Leica's proximity alarm chose that moment to scream through the shuttle's relayed comms. A high, sharp wail that meant something large and unfriendly had just dropped out of transit drive within scanning range of the derelict. Vethari patrol, Sable said, already turning toward the shuttle. They must have detected the terminus activation. That thing probably broadcasts a signature when it runs, a signal to let the Dominion know it's been used. Can we outrun them? In the Leica, she gave him a look that contained an entire technical manual's worth of reasons why not. Then we outsmart them. Head for Threshold Station. 40 minutes at full burn. We can lose them in the commercial traffic around the outer rings. Kale, that leaves you barely an hour for everything else on your list. I know what it leaves me go. The Leica was fast when she wanted to be, and Sable flew her the way Eli had taught her, not by the navigation manual, but by the feel of the ship's bones, cutting angles that shouldn't have worked, threading gaps in the expanse debris field that were technically too narrow for a vessel the Leica's size, worked if you rotated the ship 16 degrees on the lateral axis and held your breath. The Vethari pursuit vessel, a Dominion monitor, sleek and geometric, its hull the color of deep water, followed at a distance that was precisely maintained, not closing, not falling back, matching their speed with the effortless precision of a predator that didn't need to hurry because it already knew where its prey would stop. They're not trying to catch us, Ryan said from the jump seat. She looked at the creature cradled in her cupped hands, and its light was pulsing faster, agitated. Look at their vector. They could cut us off at the threshold approach corridor. They're choosing not to. Sable checked her instruments. She's right, they're pacing us, running parallel. They want to watch, Kale said. The realization came to him clearly, the way things became clear when you stopped worrying about tomorrow. They activated the terminus remotely. They detected a human reading. They've probably never seen what a human does with a death clock, and they want to observe. That's a comforting thought, Sable muttered, the throttle harder. They docked at Threshold Station on a maintenance gantry near the lower ring. The cheapest berths, the ones closest to the hull, frequented by salvage crews and smugglers, and people who didn't ask questions about why your ship was trailing a Vettery monitor. Cale moved through the docking procedures on autopilot while the countdown beat in his chest. 4,400. 73 minutes. Before they left the ship, he turned to Rhine. Rhine, she looked at him. The creature was on her shoulder now, its wings folded, its hum a quiet background note. The mural you were making, the star chart. The one I erased. He made himself hold her gaze. Shh. Made himself stay in the moment instead of sliding away into the comfortable numbness he'd been living in for almost a year. I erased it because I couldn't stand looking at it, not because it was bad, because it was good, because it was exactly the kind of thing Dad would have made. The colors, the scale, the way you got the light to look like it was moving even on a static screen. Every time I saw it, I had to remember that he was gone, and I was still here, and I hadn't earned the right to be. Ryan's jaw tightened. The muscles in her neck stood out like cables. That's not an apology, Cale said. That's an explanation. And explanations are cheap. So here's the apology. He pulled the Valeth corridor reference files from Eli's datapad. The sketches, the color notes, the scale markers, all the data Eli had left for the final quarter of his greatest hull painting. He held the pad out to her. I'm going to finish Dad's hull chart. And I want you to help me, because you're better at this than I'll ever be. And he would have wanted your hands on it. Because you owe me anything, because the painting deserves the best. And the best is you. Rhine didn't take the pad, not immediately. She looked at it, then at him, and her eyes were doing something complicated. Anger and grief and hunger and suspicion, all fighting for control of the same face. You erased 3 months of my work, she said. I know. You told me art was a waste of oxygen. I know. You said I was burning resources we couldn't afford. You said I was being selfish. You said Dad would have told me to grow up. Each sentence hit like a fist, and Cale took them all because he deserved every one. I said all of that, and every word was a lie. And I knew it was a lie when I said it, and I said it anyway, because hurting you was easier than feeling what I was actually feeling. And that is the worst thing about me. And I'm sorry. Not sorry like a word. Sorry like I'll spend whatever time I have left proving it. Rhine took the pad. Her fingers curled around it the way they curled around a paintbrush. Firm, sure, with the unconscious authority of someone who knows exactly what to do with the tool in their hand. Fine, she said. I'm doing the nebula clusters. You always got the scale wrong on nebula clusters. Dad said so. Something broke open in Cale's chest. Not the countdown, not the tightening, but something older and harder. A dam made of 11 months of frozen grief. Cracking. He almost smiled. It felt like remembering how Sable was waiting by the airlock. She didn't say anything about what she'd overheard, because Sable had always understood that some things needed to happen in their own space, without commentary. But her eyes were softer than they'd been in months. The Vettery monitor is holding position outside the station's defense perimeter, she said. They haven't approached or hailed. They're scanning us heavily. But just scanning. Let them scan. Cale pulled his father's paint kit from the storage locker. The battered metal case Eli had carried since before Cale was born. Its latches worn smooth, its corners dented. Inside, cans of industrial paint in 15 colors, mixed by hand using formulas Eli had developed over decades of trial and error. Brushes ranging from broad rollers to filament-thin detail tools, and the bonding agent. Eli's signature invention, a chemical compound sealed in a wax-stoppered flask that made the paint bond with metal at the molecular level. Station authority had tried to remove Eli's murals for years. They couldn't. The paint had become part of the hull itself, as permanent as the welds and rivets. Cale held the flask and felt the weight of his father's hands in the shape of the container. The wax seal imprinted with Eli's thumbprint, still visible after all this time. Sable. He looked at her. 4002. 66 minutes and 40 seconds. The Callaway run. You said I owe you the truth about Desh. Not now. You have now. Because I've been not now for 11 months. And it's the thing that's been rotting the floor out from under everything else. He set down the paint kit. Desh didn't die in the crash. Sable went very still. He survived it. Both of them did, Dad and Desh. They were both alive when I got to the cockpit. Dad was pinned under a structural beam, bleeding, conscious. Desh was free, bruised, concussed, mobile. He could see it as he spoke. The wrecked cockpit, the emergency lighting painting everything in red, the sounds of metal settling and atmosphere hissing through fractures. Desh told me to get Dad first. He said Dad's injuries were worse. He said there was time. So I went to Dad. I tried to lift the beam, but it was load-bearing, and the structure was compromised, and every time I moved, another section shifted. I couldn't do it alone. Kale, Desh came to help. He got up from where I'd told him to stay, and he put his hands on the beam next to mine, and we almost had it. 3 more inches, and Dad would have been free. And then the secondary collapse happened. The overhead section came down. It caught Desh across the back. He stopped, breathed. It was instant. He didn't suffer. But he died because he came to help me when I told him to stay. And if I'd gone to Desh first instead of Dad, if I'd gotten the mobile one out clean before trying the hard extraction, we'd have had 2 people lifting the beam instead of 1. Maybe we saved them both. I made the wrong call, Sable. Your brother died because I made the wrong call. The silence in the airlock was absolute. No engine noise, no station hum, no countdown. Just 2 people standing in a small metal room with the weight of the dead between them. Sable's face was unreadable. Then it was readable. All at once, everything she'd been holding back for 11 months coming to the surface. Like a depth charge, detonating in slow motion. You made the call your father would have made, she said. Her voice was rough. Ellie would have gone to the worst injured first. Every time. You know that. Desh knew that too. He got up and helped because that's who he was. Not because you told him to. Not because you failed to stop him. Because he was Desh. And Desh never once in his life stood by while someone needed an extra pair of hands. No choice you made in that cockpit is the reason he's gone. The beam is the reason. The crash is the reason. Faulty nav data that put you in that corridor is the reason. Not you. You can't know that. I've known the shape of it for months, Kale. I didn't have the details, but I knew. I could see it in the way you couldn't look at me. The way you flinched every time someone said Desh's name. The way you punished yourself by pushing away everyone who cared about you. She stepped forward and put both hands on his shoulders. Grip was hard. I was waiting for you to tell me yourself. Because as long as you were carrying it alone, it was going to kill you faster than any Vethery machine. He felt the stone he'd been carrying shift. The sharp, heavy thing lodged behind his ribs for 11 months. Not dissolving, not gone, but changing. Settling into a shape he could carry, without it cutting him open with every breath. Sable. Go paint your father's stars, she said. I'll watch the Vethery. He went out on the hull with Rhine. Threshold Station's lower ring was exposed to space, shielded only by the station's atmospheric envelope. A thin, shimmering membrane of generated air that clung to the hull like dew on cold metal, maintained by a network of projectors bolted to the ring's structural ribs. You could stand on the outer surface in a light pressure suit and look up at the raw universe, filtered by viewports or holoscreens or the comfortable lies of distance. Stars everywhere, not the tame stars of a planetary sky dimmed by atmosphere and light pollution, but the real thing. Thousands of them, millions, a violence of light that went on forever. Eli Mercer had loved it out here. He'd said it was the only honest place on the station, the one place where you couldn't pretend the universe was smaller than it actually was. The Valeth corridor mural stretched across a section of the lower ring's hull like a banner. Eli had been painting it for 2 years before the Callaway run. A sweeping panorama of the expanse's most beautiful passage, the corridor of dust clouds and newborn stars that connected the inner colonies to the frontier. 3/4 of the mural was finished. Violet nebulae trailing luminous streamers, dark lanes of interstellar dust, and stars. Hundreds of stars, each one painted in the specific color Eli had observed through his cockpit viewport. Gold for the newborns, blue-white for the hypergiants, deep red for the old ones, the dying ones. The stars that had burned so long, they'd forgotten what it felt like to be young. The final quarter was bare hull, gray, blank, waiting for hands that would never come back until now. Kale opened the paint kit and laid the cans out on the hull, in the order Eli had always used. Warm colors on the left, cool on the right, the bonding agent flask in the center like a keystone. Rhine pulled up the reference images on Eli's datapad, studying the sketches with the focused intensity of a surgeon reviewing a procedure. He wanted the nursery stars here, she said, pointing to the blank section. The cluster at the corridor's heart. New stars, still burning through their birth clouds. The youngest things in the expanse. Yeah, he drew them gold. But newborn stars are actually blue-white. That's what the spectroscopy shows. He knew that. He painted them gold because he said new things should look warm. He said science tells you what stars are. Art tells you what they mean. Ryan was quiet for a moment, holding that thought the way she'd held the creature, carefully, with both hands. Then she picked up a can of gold paint and shook it, and the rattle of the mixing bead echoed off the hull like a small, determined bell. They painted. Cale had never been as good as his father. His lines were rougher, his sense of proportion less instinctive, his colors mixed with competence rather than genius. But he knew the Valeth corridor. He'd flown it with Eli a dozen times, sitting in the co-pilot's seat while his father narrated the dust clouds like old friends. That one's shaped like a hand. See the fingers? And there's the gap where the solar wind cuts through. Looks like a river, doesn't it? And the shapes were in his hands even if they weren't in his head. He painted the dust clouds first. Broad sweeping arcs of violet and amber, layered over each other the way Eli had taught him. Wet over dry, building depth through translucency. Then the dark lanes between them, the corridors of shadow where light went to die, and new things were born from the remnants. Ryan worked beside him on the stars, placing each one with the precision of a cartographer marking coordinates, her brush moving in quick, confident strokes that turned points of gold paint into sources of light. Creature, they still hadn't named it, hovered between them on wings that caught the paint fumes and shimmered with reflected color. It hummed, and the hum was different now from what it had been on the ship. Deeper, more complex, layered with harmonics that seemed to resonate with the vibrations of the hull beneath their feet, as if it was listening to the station's heartbeat and singing along. Cale painted and the countdown ticked, and for the first time in 11 months, two rhythms didn't feel like they were opposed. The seconds were passing, yes, each one a door closing behind him. But they were also passing through something. Through the motion of his arm, through the gold light of newborn stars appearing on gray metal, through the sound of Rhine breathing beside him, alive and focused, and making something that would last longer than either of them. The seconds weren't emptying, they were filling. 3012, 50 minutes and change, Cale. Sable's voice on the comm, tight and alert. Something's happening with your biometric readings. He felt it too. The tightening in his chest had changed. Still present, still real, shifted in character. Not constriction anymore. Compression. As if the countdown wasn't closing a door but building pressure behind one. The way water builds behind a dam, the way a spring compresses before it releases. My heart rate's up, he said, not stopping his brush. It's not just your heart rate. Your dopamine levels are spiking. Not the artificial spike you get from stimulants. A genuine reward pathway activation. Your adrenaline is elevated but regulated. The pattern of action rather than panic. And your oxytocin is, she paused. Cale, your oxytocin levels are higher than anything I've seen outside of a bonding study. Your brain is doing something that the terminus was not designed to process. What do you mean? Terminus is built to predict death by reading biological trajectory. It calibrates its countdown based on the subject's neurological response to mortality awareness. Every species it's ever been used on responded to the knowledge of their death with neurological collapse, cortisol flooding, serotonin depletion, systematic shutdown of the brain's reward and motivation centers. The organism stops wanting things, stops planning, stops fighting. The terminus reads that collapse and feeds it into its model, and the model becomes self-fulfilling. It doesn't just predict death, Cale, it triggers it. The countdown creates the conditions for its own accuracy. But I'm not collapsing, no. Painting stars on a hull with a 16-year-old girl while confessing your deepest guilt to your co-pilot and letting an alien creature you found in a box sit on your neck. Your brain chemistry right now looks like someone who just fell in love, not someone dying. Creature on Cale's shoulder vibrated. Its hum peaked, hitting a frequency that he felt in the roots of his teeth. The countdown in his mind went haywire. 2D7 and 43 became 2007 and 4, then 755. Counting up, running backward. The circle that had been collapsing was opening. Sable, Cale said carefully. Is the creature doing this? Biosynth is a terminus interface component. It's designed to read the host's neurological state and feed that data back into the prediction model in real time. On a Vethathari subject or any of the 417 species they've cataloged, it reads the despair cascade and amplifies it, accelerating the countdown toward its predicted endpoint. But on you, it's reading something it has no framework for. It's feeding your neurochemistry back into the terminus system, and the system doesn't know what to do with the input. Your brain isn't dying, Kale. It's more active than it's been in months, maybe more active than it's ever been. Because I'm doing things that matter, the first time in a year. Because you're human, and humans don't respond to death clocks by shutting down. You respond by waking up. The Vethari hailed them. The voice came through the comm system translated into standard. The translation couldn't mask the architecture beneath. Crystalline, precise. Each word placed like a stone in a mosaic, no wasted syllables. No emotional coloring. Vethari speech was not designed to convey feeling. It was designed to convey truth. The distinction was fundamental to their civilization. Human, you have been measured by the terminus. Your biological endpoint has been calculated and confirmed. You are within the final phase of your existence. This is not a projection. It is a reading. I'm aware, Kale said. He was painting a dark lane between two dust clouds, and the angle required his full attention. We have observed your species before. Humans were cataloged in standard cycles ago when your expansion reached Vethari administrative space. Your biological architecture was assessed as unremarkable, carbon-based, electrochemical neural processing, moderate physical resilience, high reproductive rate, short individual lifespan. You were classified as a non-threat species and assigned minimal observation status. Glad we made an impression. Ryan, hand me the amber. We activated the terminus remotely to verify its function after the extended dormancy period of the host vessel. Your intrusion into the chamber was not anticipated but fell within acceptable operational parameters. We chose to observe rather than intervene. The terminus has never produced an inaccurate biological reading in 12,341 years of continuous operation across 417 sentient species. That's very thorough. A pause. The Vethari didn't pause for dramatic effect. They paused because the translation matrix needed to recalibrate for concepts that didn't map cleanly between crystalline and organic thought. You are not behaving within predicted parameters. What parameters were you expecting? The standard mortality awareness response. Denial, lasting between 30 seconds and 4 minutes. Comprehension, between 1 and 12 minutes. Despair, beginning immediately after comprehension and deepening until biological shutdown. Cessation of purposeful activity within 20 minutes of initial reading. Complete biological collapse with a predicted time frame. Another pause. You have not entered any of these phases. You appear to have skipped the sequence entirely. I wouldn't say I skipped it. I just decided to do something else instead. You are creating a visual representation on the exterior of this station. I'm finishing my father's painting. We understand the mechanical action. We do not understand its purpose. You are within 50 minutes of biological termination. The creation you are producing will outlast you by a negligible margin relative to cosmic timescales. It serves no survival function. It provides no tactical advantage. It transmits no genetic information. It does not extend your biological viability by any measurable interval. Kale stopped painting. He looked up at the stars. The real ones, the ancient ones, burning above the atmospheric membrane with the cold indifference of things that had never needed a reason to exist. It's not for me, he said. It's for the people who'll walk past this section of hull tomorrow and the day after that and the year after that. It's for my father, who started it and couldn't finish it. Because finishing someone's work is the closest thing to bringing them back that the allows, and it's for her. He looked at Ryan, who had stopped painting to listen, gold light on her fingers. Amber splashed across her cheek like a second constellation. Because she's going to keep making things long after the stars I'm painting have burned. Out for real. And I want her to know that I saw her, that I understood what she was. Even though it took me too long to say it. Silence from the Vethari. Not a translation pause, something deeper. Ryan looked at him, and her eyes were bright with something that wasn't tears because Ryan didn't cry, she just burned hotter. She picked up her brush and went back to the stars without a word, because some things don't need language. They just need someone to keep painting beside you. They worked for another 20 minutes. The Valeth corridor took shape under their hands. Eli's vision realized by his son and his ward, gold stars burning in violet clouds on the hull of a station that had tried to scrub his art away and failed. Every stroke was a conversation with a dead man. Every color was an answer to a question Eli had asked years ago and waited patiently to hear. Are you going to make something, or are you going to waste it? The creature hovered near Kale's head, and its hum filled the thin air of the hull like a choir, singing in a cathedral built for a congregation of 2. The countdown hit 800, 30 minutes. Then it hit 1-3, 9, 1-17, going up, Kale. Sable's voice was very quiet. Quietness of someone watching something impossible happen. On instruments that don't lie. The term-furnace countdown has reversed. Prediction model is recalibrating in real time. The biosynth is feeding your neurological data back into the system, and the system is failing to resolve it. Every model it runs predicts your collapse, and every second you don't collapse, the model loses confidence. You're creating a feedback loop. The more alive you are, the less the terminus can predict your death, and the less it can predict your death, the less it can trigger the conditions that would make the prediction true. Is it going to kill me? The terminus doesn't kill, Kale. It's never killed anyone. It predicts and it triggers what's already there. The seed of surrender that exists in every organism that understands its own mortality. It finds that seed and feeds it until it blooms. But in you it found something else. What? Stubbornness, she said. And he could hear the crack in her voice. The first crack he'd heard in 11 months. And love, and the specific, stupid, beautiful, irrational human need to make something with your hands when everything around you is falling apart. The terminus went looking for despair and found a man painting stars for his dead father, and it doesn't know what to do. The Vetheri spoke one final time. Their crystalline precision had fractured. The words came through the translation matrix, carrying a weight they were never designed to bear. The weight of a concept the Vethari had never needed, because in 12,000 years, across 417 species, they had never encountered it. This outcome is outside all predictive frameworks. The terminus has been operational for 12 millennia. No subject has produced this response. Your neurological architecture is generating compounds associated with pair bonding, creative cognition, protective aggression, and abstract reward-seeking simultaneously. This combination does not occur in any cataloged species under mortality awareness conditions. It should not be biologically possible. The energy cost alone should exceed survivable parameters. And yet, Kale said, we require an explanation. Down his brush. The countdown in his mind was climbing steadily now, 200, 2200, 300, like a clock being wound by hands that refused to stop. You built a weapon that works by choking their death and waiting for them to give up, he said, and it works. On every species you've found, the knowledge of certain death is paralyzing. The logical response to a fixed endpoint is to stop trying. Why build, why create, why love, when it's all going to end at a time that's already been calculated? The math makes sense. The biology supports it. The psychology is airtight. 417 species, and every single one agreed with your math. He looked at the mural, gold stars, violet clouds, dark lanes and newborn light. His father's vision completed, finally, by the people Eli had loved. But humans aren't logical about death. We never have been. We build things that won't last. We love people we're going to lose. We paint stars on metal that'll be recycled in a century. And when you tell us we've got 2 hours to live, we don't sit down and do the math. We make a list. We call the people we've hurt and say the things we were too afraid to say. We finish the work our fathers started. We hold the people we love, and we fight for every single second. Not because we think we can win, but because the fighting is the living, and we'd rather have 2 hours of that than 200 years of the alternative. He picked up his brush again. You gave me a countdown, and all it did was make me pay attention. The countdown in his mind crossed 3,000 and kept climbing. Creature lifted from its hover near his head, rose into the thin air above the hull, spread its wings to their full span, and blazed. Not blue, not gold, but a color that existed at the intersection of every wavelength human eyes could process. A color that was warm and bright and alive, in a way that had nothing to do with physics, and everything to do with the thing that physics couldn't measure. It sang, not hummed, sang. A single clear note that resonated through the hull, through the paint, through the bones of the station, through the bodies of every person on Threshold's lower ring, who stopped what they were doing and looked up, without knowing why. A sound like the first breath of a newborn star. The Vethri were silent for a long time. When they spoke, crystalline architecture of their language had changed. Not broken, reorganized, rebuilt around a gap that hadn't been there before. We will withdraw from this sector. The terminus will be reclassified from strategic asset to research anomaly. Your species will be reclassified. To what? Kale asked. The pause was the longest of the conversation. The translation matrix churned, reaching for a concept that 12,000 years of Vethari civilization had never needed to name, because it had never existed in their experience of the universe. Unpredictable, the Vethari said. And the word, even filtered through translation, carried something that Kale recognized instantly, the weight of genuine fear. The signal cut. The Vethari monitor turned, slow and massive, its geometric hull catching starlight as it reoriented, and slipped away into transit space. The stars remained. The station kept turning. The atmospheric membrane shimmered once, as if the universe had held its breath and was now letting it go. Trail stood on the hulls of Threshold Station and looked at the finished mural. Eli would have had notes. The scale on the third dust cloud was slightly off. The dark lanes needed another layer of depth. One of the gold stars was a shade too warm for its position in the cluster. But it was done, complete. The Valith corridor stretched across the station's skin in light and color, permanent as the metal it was bonded to. A map of a place Eli had loved rendered in a language that anyone who looked up could read. Ryan stood beside him, her hands gold to the wrists, paint on her face and in her hair. The creature settled on her shoulder and dimmed its light to a soft, steady pulse. Not urgent, not alarming, sting, content. She asked. Kale checked. The number in his mind had settled, no longer climbing, no longer falling. It sat luminous and still, like a held breath, like a star at the exact moment between contraction and expansion. Not waiting for death, waiting for whatever came next. Gone, he said, or close enough to gone that it doesn't matter. Ryan nodded. She looked at the mural, then at him. You still owe me 3 months of art. I know, and you're going to stop being terrible. I'm going to try. That's all I can promise. Trying's enough, she said. Dad always said trying was the whole thing. She sounded so much like Eli that Kale's throat closed around whatever he'd been about to say, and he let it go. Because some things were better felt than spoken. Sable came out onto the hull. She walked to where they stood, looked at the mural, at the stars, looked at the two people standing in the thin air between metal and vacuum, with paint on their hands and something new in their faces. She didn't say anything. She just stepped between them, and after a moment Kale felt her hand close around his. Calloused, strong, warm, and he held it because he could, because he was alive. Because holding on was the most human thing he knew how to do. People on the skin of a station. Stars above them, painted and real, indistinguishable in the light. A creature humming on a girl's shoulder. A dead man's painting, finished at last. Somewhere in the deep, aboard a vessel moving at speeds that bent space around itself like cloth, a Avatharise analyst was composing a report. It would be filed in a strategic database that contained the behavioral profiles of 417 sentient species, organized by response to mortality awareness. Every existing entry followed the same taxonomic pattern: denial, frention, despair, cessation, clean, predictable, useful. The human entry would be different. The analyst would struggle with it for days, drafting and redrafting in the precise, stone-on-stone grammar of Vethari administrative language, trying to compress what they had observed into categories that their civilization had used for 12 millennia. They would fail. In the end, they would write a single annotation, the shortest entry in the history of the database. And it would be flagged, reviewed, escalated, eventually read by every strategic planner in the Vethari Dominion. Species 418, human, sole origin, carbon-based, electrochemical. Response to mortality awareness, increased output. Mechanism, unknown. Replication risk, catastrophic. Classification, do not engage. Across the station, Cale Mercer cleaned his father's brushes the way Eli had taught him. Solvent first, then warm water, then reshaping the bristles by hand so they'd hold their point next time. He sealed the bonding agent flask with fresh wax, pressing his own thumbprint into the seal beside his father's. He packed the kit, stowed it in its locker, and went to the galley to make dinner for his crew. The creature rode on Ryan's shoulder, humming a melody that none of them recognized but all of them knew. The kind of tune that lives in the space between heartbeats, old as breathing, simple as the act of choosing to hold on when the math says you should let go. He didn't know what came next. He didn't need to. But the clock had stopped, and the painting was finished. And there was food to cook, and a ship to fix, and a girl who needed him to be better, and a woman who'd forgiven him before he'd had the courage to ask. That was enough. That was more than enough. That was everything. 2 hours. That's all it had taken. Not to die, but to remember what living was for. And somewhere at the bottom of a Vethari database, scratched beneath 12,000 years of confident predictions, beneath 417 species that had looked at their death clocks and done exactly what the math said they would. A single question glowed in cold blue light, unanswered, unanswerable, the first question the Vethari had ever been afraid to ask. How do you defeat a species that responds to death by falling in love with life? You don't.